Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to start in just a minute or two and let people get the chance to come on in. For those of you just joining us, we're going to get started in a minute or so. Just give everyone a chance to get in before we get started.
It's great to see all the friendly faces. So glad that you've joined us. I guess we're technically not seeing faces, but seeing names in the participant list. It's great to see you all. I guess as we have a few more folks joining in, I'll just introduce the session. So my name is David Carnes. I'm the founder and CEO of OpFocus, and this is our first session of the Dashboard Dojo. I couldn't be happier to have you all joining. It's so great to see so many friendly names in the participant list, everybody streaming in here. So thank you. I've long talked about the concept of filters first as being sort of a good mantra for reporting. And so true to that spirit, I thought to have the first session just be focused on filters. There's so many interesting ways to filter data within reports and dashboard in Salesforce. So we'll dig in. I'm sure there are some others that we can come up with as well. So why don't I go ahead and get started? All right, so for an agenda for this session, I'd like to figure out who all of you are, because there are some names that I'm not familiar with, and so glad that you've joined us. I'll tell a little bit more about who I am, and then why this idea of Dashboard Dojo in the first place. I'd like to talk about some weapons in your arsenal or in our arsenal, just some things that I think are really valuable as you get started on your reporting journey. I know so many of you worked on the platform for years and years, so you're long into your journeys, but some of these tools might be helpful as well. So I was debating between using the word waza or using the word kata, which are both meaningful within martial arts in Japan. Waza is the word for technique. And there are just so many interesting ways to do filters on the platform. And I think it's really helpful to just know as many of them as you can and practice through them. So we'll talk about standard filters, role and team filters. There's a few things that I've found confusing for probably 15 years among those, and maybe you have too. We'll talk about advanced filters and filter logic. One of my favorite topics is using formulas and filters. And when you get stuck and you think there's no way to get the data a certain way on a report or dashboard, or even filtering to identify and isolate the records that you want, we can use formulas. So always keep that, think of MacGyver with that, that creativity of having bubble gum and a bent spoon or something and just solving a problem. Well, that's what this is with using formulas. So I'll talk about an example with that. We'll talk about locking filters and why that's there. You may have noticed when you add a filter to a report, there's a little checkbox that says you can lock the filter. We'll talk about cross filters, which is probably one of the coolest things. We'll talk about field-to-field filters, which were introduced late last year. URL parameters, which I think in the early days, so 10, 15 years ago, I feel like we used them more, but it is available in reports in Lightning. We'll talk about dashboard filters, because I think it's one of the greatest ways to get more out of your dashboards. We'll take a few examples. So the word shiai means a few different things in Japanese. It means game. So we use the word shiai a lot for game. But within martial arts, it could mean sparring or a match, something like that. So I figured we'd just dive into a few examples. And one of them that I think is always just good to run through is filter logic. And then another is dashboard filter on an opportunity dashboard related to close dates. So this is one of those things that it feels like it's slightly deeper into the pool, but it's right there and available to you. And you can actually just get more out of your dashboard filter-wise by taking advantage. So we'll take a look at that. We'll wrap up by talking about some upcoming dojo topics. I'd love to hear from you on what you might like to see in the dojo. My thinking is to get together once a month and just learn stuff together, and we'll figure out ways to make it interactive. I'll talk a little bit about OpFocus training, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. And I think that's some of the most important stuff and most interesting things is hearing what you're up to, what you're trying to do, and just, talking through those things. All right, great. So I think our list is doubled since I started talking. That's fantastic. All right, so I'd really like to know, who are you and why are you here? So I'm going to ask Kyle to launch a poll. Just what type of organization do you represent? Some of you are with companies with 10,000 employees that serve B2C. Others of you are with nonprofits. I probably missed a few categories, but just thought to ask this question and get a sense of who's joined us today. And yes, I'm a Star Wars fan. In fact, I just finished racing through The Mandalorian this weekend. I don't know how I didn't watch it before. It was great. The Jon Favreau written episodes are really good. He wrote 3 or 4 at the beginning and a couple at the end. All right. What do we have, Kyle?
Sure. So it looks like B2B was the clear top choice, roughly 57%. Right behind it, education, B2C, and Han Solo coming in.
Are you able to show that?
Are you able to see it, David?
I'm not able to see it. Hopefully somebody can.
Yes, I believe the attendees should be able to see it, but B2B is coming in just under 60%, with everything else roughly at 10%.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you, everyone. So a second quick poll. Oh, there we go. I'm seeing it now. Fantastic. So nonprofit 10%, higher ed 12%. This is probably what I expected. So that's great. I'm so pleased for everyone who's solo currently on your journeys. There are jobs out there. People are hiring if that's what you're looking for, and certainly brushing up on these skills never hurts. All right, so maybe we jump to the next one. I'm really curious, and this is a multi-select poll. What kind of reports are you responsible for? What are you looking to do? Is it on, as in Boston, we say, on the marketing side? Is it fundraising or sales, support, client success? I think of operations as sort of, the nuts and bolts of your organization. It could be program delivery. It could be project oversight, that sort of thing. Finance is pretty clear. I think of executive and board as being slightly different. Executive being your C-level suite for running the business, and then the board being that oversight above. And if you're not sure what these guys are doing here, this is a Kyudo dojo. One of the first dojos, I lived in Japan twice, and one of the first dojos that I went to was for Kyudo, and it was in the neighborhood of my homestay family, and it was really cool. It was just really, really cool to watch the precision and the tradition. Kyle, what do we have? All right, so half on marketing, that's great. Sales fundraising seems to be at the top of the list. Support, So we've got a really healthy spread. So a lot of you have quite a bit of responsibility, and even seeing over a quarter have board responsibility, that's pretty significant. And over half having executive level reporting. So this is great. All right, thank you. This is really helpful. All right, so just to share a little bit about me. So I started OpFocus 14 years ago with the goal of helping businesses optimize their operations. We've been working on Salesforce since client number one. Along the way, I've taught for Salesforce, and I've been teaching all these years. In fact, quite a few of in class have been through, quite a few of you here in the dojo have been through my one or more of my classes, which is great. I've been part of the Lightning Champion program the last couple of years, which has been fun, helping companies take that step toward Lightning. And I thought to share one personal note. I used to give tours at this incredible castle over here. So this is Himeji Castle. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The first fortification on that hill was built in 1333 by Akamatsu, and there are 911 windows in that building. It's a pretty cool space. Lots of slits for arrows and for dumping hot oil and boulders on people, that sort of thing. This was actually the castle used in the Shogun miniseries back in the 70s. So this was the epitome of a Japanese castle, and I happened to live in that city for a few years and got involved in the tour guide program. So OpFocus, we're based in the US and Canada. We're a Gold Salesforce partner. We also provide services on HubSpot, Pardot, and Marketo. Our focus is working with SaaS companies on their revenue operations. So reports and dashboards are a big part of that, BI tools, just overall KPIs, metrics. So personally, this feels like a great fit. I'm really pleased to spend time with you in the dojo. All right, let's get going. So what is a dojo? So I love this translation. Dojo is the place to learn the way. And this goes right back to the Mandalorian talking about the way, but the place to learn the way. And I think of this as something we can learn together. The best way that I learn is actually preparing for a session like this or answering people's questions, because you find out all these interesting use cases and all the cool solutions that you guys have come up with. So this is Kendo, which is Japanese sword fighting, and it's pretty intense. All right, so let's talk about the weapons in your arsenal. So if you've seen me present before, I'm fairly fussy about the type of org that I present from. So I'll always use an Einstein Analytics enabled dev org, and whether or not I'm doing anything with Einstein Analytics, I just prefer these dev orgs for two big reasons. One is the starting set of data is great. There are thousands of records instead of a normal dev org has about 50 records. Secondly, there is a tool called the Trailhead Data Manager that allows you to push the opportunity close dates forward. So this particular org I've been using for Camp Success webinars for Salesforce the last 6 months, and I can just keep running that tool and moving the dates forward. So that's pretty helpful. One quirky thing about these dev orgs is that there are thousands and thousands of records. There are 1,001 accounts, but there are 0 contacts. And I point out this page here, storage usage. I find it really valuable to know the universe of data that you're working with, right? So as a consultant, we parachute in, we have to figure out, the situational awareness, like what's going on the ground here. How many records are we talking about? We've worked with companies that have 10 million accounts. We work with companies that have 1,000 accounts, and that's a big number. And it really doesn't matter, but it's helpful to know what's the outer range, especially when you go to start reporting, because if you add a bunch of filters and you end up with 7 records, you don't really know, you need to know what that outer bound is. So this is in setup. So as a non-admin, you can actually get to this place. And if I go under setup, expand data, the bottom choice is storage usage, and you can just see here your progress toward your data and file limits, and then individual record counts. So you can see there are 2,000 tasks in this org. So I find that a pretty helpful place. Another tool I really like is there's this free site called cloudtoolkit.co, and they have a toolkit, a variety of tools for Salesforce, but one of them that I find helpful just to get to know a system is this thing called Schema Lister, and it'll allow you to spit out an Excel workbook with a worksheet for each of the core objects. So imagine accounts, contacts, opportunities, etc. And you can see all of the fields, the data types, pick list values, et cetera. And what we would typically do is add a few columns and make a data dictionary around that. So if you need to clean up your system, or you're just trying to figure out why do we have a field called industry, one called market, one called market segment, another one called industry segment, and so on, like which field do we use, having a data dictionary can be helpful. The schema builder has been around a long time. You can find that under setup as well. It's just a nice way to see how the objects are connected. If you're reporting on custom object data, or you're trying to figure out CPQ, which has, I think, something like 80 objects, the schema builder can actually show you how those objects are connected. One final thing to share this idea of, I've seen a lot of companies have leaders. So as they grow, they bring on additional leaders to the organization, and you realize that they're not speaking the same language. When they talk about a booking, they're not talking about the same thing, or even a donation, or participation or attendance, or whatever it is. I think it's really helpful, especially if you're new to an organization. Just start writing those things down and come up with a glossary. Then when you hire a new head of marketing, a new head of sales, hand them the glossary, and this is how it is here. So whatever you used before, we're not using that now unless we debate it and agree to the change. But this can be really helpful. One client that was very memorable years ago, I sat with the leadership team, and I realized that they had 4 different ways that they were thinking about bookings, and what a mess that was. All right, so let's dive into some techniques. So I mentioned this list before. Let's talk about filters first and why. So I think this is a really good mantra. When you dive into a report, for a couple of reasons. One, Salesforce has these weird standard filters that are just to protect the database that are in there, but it's also just good to know a couple things. One, are there any filters applied? So you can see this circle with the number 1 in it. Separately, just to see, did Salesforce put any strange filters? So if you've ever created a report on the lead object, you've noticed that it shows you my leads created in the last 7 days. Well, I'm typically a sysadmin, so I typically don't own any leads, and that's not that helpful. As of now, there is no way to flush all the standard filters. You just have to go in and update them. One of the techniques that I really like to suggest is, let's say that company I mentioned that had the 10 million accounts, if they were really interested in something complex like, all the accounts in Iowa that are in this particular industry, but they're below this size, or they could be a partner, rather than adding all those filters right away, run the report with no filters, maybe collapse the data records so it runs a little faster, see what the total count is, and then add a filter, see what the total count is, add a filter. It's a really nice way to get to know the data, so you have a sense of what are you dealing with. The worst thing is reporting on data that doesn't exist. Somebody says, go create this report on this, but the data doesn't exist. So it's a nice way to get to know the health of the data. You might even add a few of the relevant columns so you can see what's going on as you're adding the filters, and just see the health of the data in there as well. All right. So let's talk about standard and advanced filters. I think in the olden days, we used to talk about standard and advanced filters a little bit more. So in Classic, you create a report, there were some standard filters at the top, and then you'd add advanced filters. We don't really use those terms so much, but they still are in the document set. So when we talk about, so in the help docs, they're still there. You talk about the standard filters, so it depends on the report type that you're reporting on. There may be, for an account, it says show me, and it's normally set to my accounts created in the last 7 days. So you might clean that up and just make that wide open. And then you can add 1 or more advanced filters. In fact, I believe we can add 20, which is a very big number. I got bored at about 12 a little while ago. And we have the ability to mix and match and do some interesting things. So we can add these individual field filters. We can take advantage of relative date ranges, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We can add filter logic, and you can see that over here. We have 1 or 2. Well, typically what you do is add an advanced filter. So I have industry equals agriculture, apparel, comma, banking, biotech. And then I added a second one on type contains customer. And then the third thing I did was go to this filter action pull down and add filter logic, and I just set that to 1 or 2. So by default, as you're adding these individual advanced filters, it's using ands in between them, and we can get fairly complex, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I mentioned earlier about the locked filter. So there's a little checkbox here, and it's sort of like if you hover over the little letter I for information, you could figure it out. But essentially, when a user goes and runs that report, are they able to make modifications to it? And there may be a reason that you do not want them to change a particular filter. Let's say that the report is based on data that's been approved, and you have some kind of an approved checkbox, and you don't want them seeing the mess data that you know, disregard what's going on behind the curtain over there. You could, add an advanced filter and essentially lock it. I'll show the ability to modify filters in a few slides. So one of the first types of standard filters is the role hierarchy filters. This was a little bit of a hot mess when the Lightning reporting, even up to about a year ago. One of the reasons that there was some issues with it is the role hierarchy-based reporting. There was an obscure requirement that I figured out that I believe Salesforce has since cleaned up, which is fantastic. So this is much easier to work with. But what this allows you to do, the role hierarchy filter specifically, is you have this choice of the show me, and a lot of us just set it to all opportunities and use other filters, but we can actually go a bit deeper in the show me, and I can say show me all these opportunities based on essentially the opportunity owner's role. And if I pick sales WW, what's interesting is it's not just people in that role, it's people that are reporting up to that role. So we might have 15 roles below it, and we want, essentially what we're picking is all the people in the sales WW and the ones below. We do have a feature here where we can narrow by person. And it also, anybody who's reporting up to that person in the role hierarchy is also included. So you think you're narrowing to Bob, but Bob has this little team of interns that are doing something over here. Well, those records get rolled up as well. So it's kind of interesting how they deployed this. But this show me field has a bunch of features wrapped up into it. So let's first talk about these role hierarchy filters are available on activities, such as tasks and events. Those are the two hard-coded record types for activities. Campaigns with opportunities, forecasts, and some of the opportunity report types, but not all of them. Now, another thing that you can see in this show me pull down is if you've enabled one of the team functionalities, such as account teams, account teams, opportunity teams, or case teams, you could see them depending on the report type here, and you can see my team's accounts, my account team's accounts, and my account teams and my accounts. That can be confusing. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So there are some nice options here to drill in, and I was so pleased to notice that Salesforce fixed something under the hood, and it's one of those things that'll never be in a doc, release notes or anything. That fix, just great that they fix that one thing. I tweeted about it in November. I was like, oh, this isn't good, but I think they fixed it. So I started to talk about team filters, and once you've enabled this feature, account teams is ancient, opportunity teams is ancient, case teams maybe came out 9 or 10 years ago. Basically all of them have been updated, which is great. So if you're using that, what's really great about this is allowing you to filter on non-owners. So let's say I'm on the opportunity team and I'm the pre-sales engineer. I don't own any of those opportunities, but it'd be helpful to me to see a list of all the opportunities that are open where I'm on the team. And so we can use filters for that, and I can see my team's accounts or my account team. So here's the confusing bit. The one that says my account team's accounts and my account team and my accounts, these two are related to the account team functionality. This is where I think Salesforce made a mistake. For years, they've had this other one that says my team's accounts. That's related to the role hierarchy. So I kind of wish they'd say my roles accounts. I think that would clarify this. I think for years I've always had to do a double take and sort of scratch my head and say, I think this is the right one. So I'll just restate that. If you enable account teams, you've got these two options here. On an opportunity report, if you enable opportunity teams, you'd see those. And these are great for non-owner reporting. Field filters, we can have up to 20 per report. I mentioned that. There's a long list of operators. And this is one of those things, if you don't just scroll down just a tiny bit more, you're going to miss some pretty powerful operators. So when you go add an advanced filter, a field filter, the operator shows up and it shows you this nice list. But if you don't scroll down, you're not going to see contains, does not contain, or starts with, which could solve a problem that you may have. We can combine field filters with filter logic. You can see this long list here. I added 12 filters and started to get bored, but none of these filters really make sense. I just wanted to add them as quickly as I could. If you don't use the filter logic, the operator, essentially the logic between these is ands. So it's account owner not equal to blank and account owner alias not equal to blank. And like I said, these don't really make sense as filters, but once added, they're separated by ands until you add filter logic. And the filter logic gets kind of interesting. So we can combine ands, ors, nots, and parentheses, and you can nest the parentheses. I've got an example here in the system. Just get rid of this, and I've got one. Here we go. And let's dive into this. Okay, it looks like I was just starting something on filter logic. So there isn't filter logic on this report now. I just have, there is filter logic on this now. I didn't click to the filters tab here. And you can see 1 and 2 in parentheses, or 3 and 4. And this is the filter logic. And it's basically you add each of these field filters and then add a row of logic. And we can change the logic here. And we could change, make this an and change that to an or we could use a not. And the filter logic can get fairly complex. So you could have up to 20 field filters and you might have very complex logic if needed. While we're here, I do want to point something out where a lot of people get into trouble when they add filters. So let's say that I add a filter on annual revenue, and I want to say the annual revenue is greater than, and I want to do 1 million. Something you don't want to do is what I'm doing here, is use commas in your filter, because what Salesforce will do is interpret that as 1 or 0 or 0. And the same is true with one of these filters here. Don't leave a hanging comma, because it'll be Florida or Colorado or Connecticut or null if I leave that extra hanging comma there. So something that I sort of found digging into the documentation set is that Lightning doesn't yet support row filters. However, if you switch back to Classic and you add a row filter, like let's say I have a report on my top opportunities and I just want to see the top 10. Classic supported that feature. I believe it is on the roadmap for Lightning. But if you create a report in Classic and add a row filter, it's actually honored in Lightning. You just can't see it. It's invisible. So I thought that was kind of interesting and obscure. Field-to-field filters came out in the last year. We can filter on numbers, dates, and date time fields. The data types must match. That kind of makes sense. You can see here I've got an example where I'm reporting on opportunities, and the last modified date is greater than, and I've changed from the normal value choice to a field choice, and this is available because this particular field here is either a number, a date, or a date time, and I can compare the value in one field to another. So in this case, this is sort of an obscure example, but it's probably the best one I came up with, where we want to look at perhaps closed won opportunities and see all the ones that have been modified after the close date. And this is how you might solve that. So let's say we're in a nonprofit organization, and once a donation's been closed, nothing should happen to it. We don't want to have any changes to that donation, somebody messing around. That might impact something or an integration. So we just monitor and see, we create a report with these field filters to say, have any of the donations been modified after close? So you can have up to 4 of these per report. If you do use currency fields, they're not supported if multi-currency is enabled, so that's unfortunate. The report type that you use cannot be a left out or join. So this is one of the standard report types, opportunities, but if I had opportunities with or without products, so if I create a custom report type and I set it up with that, essentially a with or without, so it's a left out or join, we can't use the field-to-field filters. They're also not supported on joined reports. So sometimes when we have these limitations, they change as the releases go by. But for now, I believe those are still the limitations on field-to-field filters. So I'd be really curious to know how many of you have taken advantage of field-to-field filters since they were introduced. One of my absolute old favorites is relative date filters. This has been around forever, but the list has grown longer over time. So these allow us to filter dates dynamically. This is not just for report filters. This is for list views. This is for workflow rules and other things in the system. My strong recommendation is if you use these, so let's say you can see here on the screenshot on the left, I've added a filter on the created date and I'm using equals, and you see the link here to use a relative date. Well, if you choose that, then you can use this whole list that's in help. So if you look in help for relative date filter reference, this list has gotten longer and longer and longer over the years. And you could say the created date equals yesterday, tomorrow, last week, this week, next 5 weeks, last 72 weeks. You know, you can come up with oddball things, but that's true for quarters and fiscal years and weeks that you can do last, next, and so on. This list just has gotten longer and longer over time. But my strong suggestion is if you're going to use these, use equals or not equals. You start to get into trouble when you use greater than or less than. Until you really master this, I'd say equals and not equals is going to solve most of your needs. And you can see here what I've done. I've got an example of with an advanced, so a couple of advanced filters and filter logic where I've said the created date equals this quarter or the created date equals last quarter. Now on our blog from over a decade ago, we weren't able to do this. So the this quarter, last quarter might not have existed as a relative date filter reference. And so I actually wrote a formula, and I just wanted to make a plug for, I mentioned the idea a while ago on, of thinking like MacGyver and just solving things. Formulas can really help you out of a jam. So as needed, you can use a row level formula or a custom formula field. And the idea here is to have the output be true or false. So for that example that I shared with you, that created date equals this quarter to created date equals last quarter, I wrote that formula literally 10.5 years ago and put it on our blog. So if the date value of create date, the case the month is today, and if it's 1, that means January, then go back this far, 2, go back this far, 3, and it's basically by quarters. So January, February, March are in Q1, so it would go back to July 1st of last year. In fact, this must have been current quarter plus prior 2 quarters, so I apologize, I misspoke there. But you understand, we just couldn't do it any other way. But this is still sort of an applicable thing. I wouldn't have to write the formula now because I could use the relative date values. But still, every now and then you get into a jam and you can't figure out how to filter something, you might actually write a formula. So there are 2 options now. Over here on the left, we have row level formulas, and you can see I wrote a simple one here, and I'm just trying to filter out some of our regions. So we have a custom field on account called region, and I'm using a row level formula with a case function to say, if it's CALA, true, if it's APAC, true, maybe these are emerging regions for us. North America, NAR is false, EMEA is false. Mars, however, is true. So that's one of our emerging reasons. We're just going to get way ahead of Elon Musk. And what you can do with a row level formula or a custom formula field is once you create that, and the row level formula you create right on the report, you can then use it in a filter. So I can write my little formula and determine true or false, and then just filter on that field, emerging test equals true. So please, please, please always keep this in the back of your mind. This guy, David, said I might be able to write a formula. Like, this has saved my butt so many times. All right, let's keep going. So cross filters. This was one of the coolest ads, and I really want you to be comfortable with these. These allow you to filter to see records with or without related child records. And so you think of like, nothing's up my sleeve. I'm creating a report on accounts. Now, accounts is kind of king of the hill in the data model in a lot of our systems. For some of the nonprofit folks, it might be households, right? Accounts may be relabeled. Well, we often have a lot of other objects in the system pointing up to accounts. I can create a report on accounts and filter it based on whether there are contacts or none, whether there are opportunities or none. I can go one step further and have it filter on whether there are opportunities that are open or not. So if you're doing account-based marketing, so 60% of you said that you're in B2B, you might be doing account-based marketing, and you're really focused on these target accounts. So of our 100 target accounts, which ones do not have open pipeline? I can solve it with a cross filter. So this works with all report formats. The objects that are available depend on what child objects exist pointing up to, so it'd be a master detail or a lookup relationship pointing up to accounts. So each report can have up to 3 cross filters. I've never used more than one, but you could use more than one. You've got 3. And then each of those filters can be filtered up to 5 times. You can see in my screenshot here, I've created a report on accounts. I've got all accounts, all time, that the type is customer, and I want to see the ones that don't have cases. So I'm creating a report on the account object, but I'm filtering it with a cross filter to show ones that have no cases. Now I've gone one step further to say, not only that, I just want to know the people that aren't calling us, because when on a support organization, phone calls are expensive. You want people either self-servicing through a portal or email. So I might want to focus on all the people that haven't called us. Those are customers that don't cost us as much, perhaps. So I've added a filter to the cross filter. So if you start to use these, the filter logic doesn't apply. These are in their own category. So you could have your report with your standard filters. You could have many field filters, and then you can have up to 3 cross filters down at the bottom, but the advanced filter logic doesn't apply. So I think those are great. Something else that I think is valuable is just knowing that you can filter in the runtime environment. This is something I want you to teach your end users. So the first thing is, when you're looking at a report, especially for those of you that are transitioning, you're new to an organization, and you're like, what the hell am I looking at, right? When you're looking at this report, trying to figure out what you're looking at, you've got a nice little secret back door here. This funnel thing, this filter will bump out, and it'll show you the filters on that report. So that's one helpful thing. And an end user can actually modify these. The second thing is we have charts, and your users can be taught to click on these segments of the chart, and that'll filter the records down below. The third thing, and this is a matrix report. When you have a matrix report, you can actually click on these individual cells, and it'll filter down the records to just show that cell. So I do want to show you that in the system. So I've got a handy dandy report here, and I have to figure out which one it is. I think it's this one. All right, so it looks like I didn't add the report to that one. All right, well, let's just go ahead and add a chart so we can see. Ah, this one isn't even filtered correctly, huh? Okay, so let's add a chart to this one. Make it a stacked column, so it's a little bit more interesting. And all right, so this one isn't a matrix, but regardless, just to point out, when you're looking at a report that somebody's created for you, one of your senior leadership in your organization, you want to teach them that they can go ahead and click on the filter, and they can actually modify the report from here. What if I want to see all the ones that are the opportunities are closed or closed won? I don't want to see all the open ones. I just want to see the ones, or I just want to see the ones that are open where the close date is the current fiscal year. What are we going to close before the end of the year? So that's a really nice thing that our end users can be taught to do directly on a report. So we're not limited there. I can actually click on one of these charts and it'll filter the report down below. And as I mentioned, if the report is a matrix report, you could click on one of those boxes and it'll further filter the records down below. But we have to teach our users about this. All right, so one of the cool advanced things is URL-driven report filters. I mentioned probably like 10 years ago or more, we loved using these in Classic. So you'd have a button on a page layout, and I'm going to show an example here of a campaign rundown. This is something I should have added to my own system a long time ago, because I'm always wondering who attended the training from this organization. So what I could do is just add a button on the page layout, and that's a custom button. Within the custom button, actually reference a report, and the magic is at the end of that link. So you copy and paste the URL of the report, and then you add a question mark, FV0, so filter value 0, and that's the first filter on the list, the first advanced filter, equals, and I'm merging in the account ID. So that's what I've set up here. And on the underlying report itself, typically what I do is stick that report in a system folder so nobody changes it, make that folder read-only, create the report that I want, in this case, campaign contacts for account, and I just add a filter that doesn't do anything. It says account ID equals blank, so it's just null, but that gets overridden when you have a link calling for this report and it has the parameter added to the end. Now, every now and then you'll want to pass in a field dynamically that'll have a space in it, and it's important that you URI encode the resulting URL. And what Salesforce will do is put in a %20 to replace any blank spaces. So I think we can actually dig into this, and I'll just show you. So if we go to an account, I have this account in this system called Alvarez something or other. Now there are three contacts in this: Mary, John, and Tina Smoot. And these folks have been associated to some campaigns, but it's sort of hard to go find that. So I thought, why not just add a button here that goes and runs that report, and it passes the account ID. So this is all of the campaigns that are associated, all the contacts that are associated to campaigns, and those contacts tied to that account. And I could actually see up in here the filter value, FV0. I'm sorry, it's probably so tiny on your screen, but FV0 is that first filter value. What's kind of cool about this is you can actually pass multiple values if you needed to. So we're not limited to FV0. We could actually go further, and you could have FV1. You just put an ampersand. So that first parameter that you add starts with a question mark. So at the end of the report's URL, question mark FV0, and then you merge in something like the account ID. And if you want to merge in a second filter value on your report, just make sure you have a second advanced filter. And then that one you reference ampersand FV1 equals, and then merge in the value. And you could do ampersand FV2 and so on. So I'd love to hear if any of you have any of these that you have done that are serving a need, or if this helps solve a problem for you. It's a great way of expanding the use of your reports. All right, so let's talk about dashboard filters. This is one of those things, and I think I share it in the spirit of, I wish I had started using these sooner. Like, it's so easy, and it's kind of cool what you can do. So you can see here, I've added a filter to a dashboard, and we can change the display name. So on the account out of the box, it's billing country. I don't need the word billing, it's just country. This is the one that we use. And you can add up to 50 filter values. And the cool thing, like Benelux is actually multiple countries. What's it, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. And I've just added a filter value with commas separating so that, and then I just have the word Benelux. if I just wanted to have that one, essentially that region. But you can have up to 50 filter values per filter, and you can have up to 3 filters per dashboard. So you can see here, I've got a dashboard with executive sponsor, key metrics, and the country equals Benelux. And then I've got a second filter that's active, and this is now the intersection of these 2 filters. And we can have 3 filters if you need to. So filters, filter, filters here. So this is the intersection of Benelux and agriculture on this. One other kind of cool thing with this is if you click away and you click back, that last filter that you set, that combination of the filters, is remembered. So if we come back to the dashboard tab, and I've already gone ahead and added a couple of filters here. So let's actually just go see how they're built. So if I go into the filter, so to add a filter, I can still add one more. I'd click plus filter. And maybe why don't we, while we're here, just for giggles, we'll add another one on, we could, let's see, what kind of data do we have in our system? We could do, we've already got industry. So there's probably nothing in the rating field. So you think I'd have a ready-made example for all this. Why don't we do it on opportunity stages? So that's kind of random. And I could add individual values. So I want to see all the deals that are open that are in prospecting. And I could go ahead and apply that. And maybe I'll just add just a couple of these. And maybe we're really interested in these last couple proposal. So I've just added another filter on stage. Now to show you how these other ones were created, if I click on the pencil here, I can see country, and you can see these values. And if I click on the one for Benelux, you can see I've just entered in Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and can create a grouping like that if we want. Just change the display text to Benelux in that case. So I'll just go ahead and click done, and we can see how this works. So if I want to make it just clear it out, I can just, within each one of these, change. And you see how quickly it just redraws. Now, if I click away, and then I click back, and I look at the dashboard again, it actually remembers that country was all, industry was agriculture, and I hadn't done anything with stage yet. So let's actually show that one at work. So let's look at our negotiation review. And we don't have a lot of data in that one stage. So this one may be a little bit harsh, but just to show you the power of this. So something else that's kind of cool is these filters, if you embed a dashboard into your homepage, the filters work there as well. So I have a dashboard. It's the exact same dashboard. You can see how quickly stage was added to it. And I had cleared the filters, and it remembered the fact that I had stage still set. So I think that's kind of just a great thing available to us. So a little bit about advanced plumbing. A lot of us, if we create a dashboard filter, we kind of stop there, but there's a little bit more we can do that Salesforce squeezed in, and I'd love to know who the big client was that asked for this. But basically, I've got an example here where I've got the close date filter. And with each one of the components on my dashboard, I can actually swap the plumbing out if I want. So this is currently filtering on close date, but if I want to change it, maybe filter that particular component on last activity date, the filter choices here will then apply to a different field for this one component. This is one of those moments like why would they do this? That had to be a very large client, but this may, save your bacon sometime. Like let's say that you have a field called close date, and you have another field that you need called RevRec date, revenue recognition date, and you want to apply the same filter and use it differently. That's another way to actually get past the limit of 3 filters per dashboard if you wanted a different type of component to react using a different date field in this case. All right, so we just talked about a whole bunch of things quickly, and I do want to shift gears. So we talked about filters first. We talked about the standard filters. When you create a report, they're up at the top of the filter tab. we can add a whole variety of different types of advanced filters. We can also take advantage of URL parameters and dashboard filters. So there's a lot out there. You know, I thought for diving into two particular topics, I mentioned the advanced filter. In fact, we've already kind of looked at this, where we had 4 filters on a report, and we just played a little bit with the 1 and 2 or 3 and 4. Sometimes if you have 20 field filters on a report, that logic can get really complex and sort of gnarly to think through. But very powerful way of drilling in. Now let's say that the 20 fields isn't enough. You can always create a custom formula field on the object, and you can write a very long formula, the result of which is true or false, and then filter on that. So if this isn't good enough, like let's say NASA would have a different level of need, they might create a custom formula field, just use a field just to support even one report to get the filtering right. Let's actually dive into this example here. We'll filter an opportunity pipeline dashboard on dates. And I created a very simple dashboard here just to show this one example, that we can add a filter and we can use relative date values within the filter. This is a really nice way of just getting more out of your dashboard. You want to teach your exec staff how to use this, but basically the filter sits here. And right now we're looking at opportunities with a close date next month, but I can switch that and essentially rerun it to what does our pipeline look this month. And it makes this much more interactive. And the way that we did that was to just come in here, and when you add a value, you can choose it to be a particular calendar date, like February 1st, or have it be relative. And you switch to relative, you can use that same list from that help doc page that I mentioned on the relative date values, and put in, next 72 days, something like that, and that'll literally be the next 72 days. And we've just updated our filter. It's that easy. Remember to save it, click done. And now we have the ability to look at the next 72 days. Now, there are some things to realize about that, like next 72 days does not include today, right? It's literally the next 72 days. And so there may be things that you want to be really clear on, like this month ends September 30th, next month begins. You may want to have something like rolling next 30 days that gives sort of a less harsh view and more of a rolling view. All right. So I would love to have you back to talk about other things, but I'd really like to know what those are. So I picked a few topics for the fall. So I've got October 7th. There are so many great trending options to talk through. November 3rd, I thought to do more of a hands-on session. We'll need to have everybody set up on on one of these Einstein Analytics dev orgs, and I can tell you how to do that. And then we'll install a private App Exchange app that I created with some dashboards. And then let's just go do more with dashboards. Let's just go play with that. I thought to wrap up the year right after what would have been Dreamforce to talk about roadmap and then recent features. And I'll have a special guest for that. But I'd love to hear what you'd be interested in. Kyle, can we launch that poll?
Yep.
So if you had to pick one thing, and I'm sorry to limit it to one, what would be most value to you? We can dig into examples of marketing reports, support reports, charts. The list could go on. There's many things to talk about. Do a session on formulas. So this would be really helpful to me to understand what would be helpful to you.
Give it a few more seconds. Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Stephanie. This has been really...
All right, formulas. How did I know? So the most popular page on our website for probably 6, 7, 8 years was a blog article I wrote on formulas years ago. So that's fantastic. And let's just figure out what the second is. Intro to Einstein. Cool. Custom report types. Oh, such a valuable skill. Dashboards. Oh, great. So thank you for all this feedback. This is really helpful. I did want to mention I have 2 classes. I've been teaching now for 15 years on the platform, which is crazy. I just try to teach 3 times a year. Some of you in the session today have been in my classes. It's great to see you. So a 5-day admin class. So it's to prep folks for the admin certification, but also to just sort of encourage a deeper level of thinking on the platform. So it's really a fun week. I also have the 2-day reporting workshop coming up, and we'll just touch every switch and lever across 2 days. We'll do this virtually, so I've got them coming up in the next month and a half. All right, so I think we've got a few minutes for Q&A. I also thought to just share, if you're not following me on Twitter, I try to tweet about something to do with reports and dashboards as often as I can. And if we don't get to any of the questions, if you list a question, I'll try to answer them on Twitter, any of the ones that we don't answer now. So any questions come in, Kyle?
Yeah, it looks like a number were asked in the chat. Let's see.
Okay.
So one of them was on cross filters. I find some people don't understand that they are using standard report types. If it mentions 2 objects, opportunities with quotes, it will not show without. It will not show those without the ... or functionality.
Okay. So yeah, so a lot of times when I'm using these, and I'll just create a quick report, and
But I'm excited to be here. It's great to meet everyone. I'm excited to learn more.
just clean up the filters, the standard filters here, and then we'll go ahead and add a. So when we're doing it on this type, and I go ahead and add a cross filter, you're popped right up. You're given show me accounts. That's what I'm reporting on, with or without, and I can choose the secondary object. So give me all the accounts that don't have a case, let's say, and you know, the report reruns and whatnot, and we can add further filters. So where people get into trouble, I think, is creating one of these on one of these ones like accounts with partners or accounts with account teams, and you literally can create a situation that's not possible. So I've got accounts with account teams, and you know, if I add a cross filter to this, I can literally say, give me all the ones without account teams, and that doesn't make any sense, clearly. So people can get into trouble easily this way. I think the question is about a custom report type, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So maybe we'll dig into we'll do a session on custom report types, and we'll dig into cross filters for that. Any other questions come in, Kyle?
Is there a way to filter using a subtotal or record count when using groups?
Okay, so let's actually. Okay, so let's say that I have an opportunity report, and I'm going to look at all opportunities by industry, and we want to filter on record count or like a sum, something like that. So not directly. Sort of a nice way to deal with that would either be a row level formula or just using the power of 1. So the power of 1, we've talked about it for years, gives us a way, you know, we create a custom formula field on each object, and literally the formula is just the number 1. If that record's included, the number 1 shows up. Well, we could sum that column because it's a number. The output type would be number, and then we could do filtering on that field as well. So just trying to think of another example for that. Another thing that you could consider is conditional formatting. So it wouldn't necessarily be filtering, but you could have red, yellow, green if you wanted to highlight records below a certain count or above a certain count. In this case, you know, maybe on, so the conditional formatting doesn't work on the record count, but it does work on summed columns. So if I have sum of the amount and I want to say, so it's not filtering, but it's highlighting the differences. All right. So, you know, what we'll try to do for next time is talk less, listen more, and allow a bit more time for the Q&A. I think if you want to reach out to me, direct message me on Twitter, reach out on LinkedIn, reach out by my email. I think it's part of the notifications you'll be getting about the webinar. I'm really happy to address and talk about things, and you know, whether the answer comes in a blog article or a tweet, I'm very happy to do that. So I'm thrilled that you joined us today and look forward to seeing you back in the dojo again October 7th. October 7th.
Thank you, everyone.
So look forward to seeing you again soon.